topic for today's class. The topic for today's class is animal rights. This is a topic which can be explained in common sense words or in very technical terminology. I'm going to try to explain it first in common sense words, but also giving you access to the more fancy technical language for this field. We know that animals do not have legal rights. We know that. If they did, we couldn't do anything to them. We couldn't use them for our purposes. We couldn't kill them. We couldn't eat them. So the question in this class is to try to determine whether animals have moral rights. Now, what do we call moral rights? Well, fundamentally, the right to life, the right to stay alive, to have our well-being respected, to be helped when in need, for example. Right now, as I said, legally speaking, animals do not enjoy those rights because we use them, we kill them, we do anything we want to them. Our concern here is with the moral part of it. If we were to determine that animals do have rights, and if there were a consensus in society that animals actually have moral rights, then the next step would be to have those rights also defined in legal terms, but that's beyond the scope of this class. So our discussion here is about moral rights. Who has moral rights? Well, we humans have moral rights. And when it comes to determining what kinds of humans are there in this context of morality, we make the distinction between two types of humans. We call them moral agents and moral patients. Moral agents are those who can make rational decisions, who can tell right from wrong, and who can, therefore, start moral action, who can initiate moral action, do good or do evil. Only adult human beings are able to do that. But then there are other human beings, such as babies, or people who are in a coma, or people who suffer a state of deep mental retardation, that cannot make moral decisions. Therefore, they're not liable for whatever they do. If a little baby happens to press the button that makes the nuclear bomb drop, and we can't blame him. We can't take him to trial because a 1-year-old, 2-year-old baby doesn't know what he's doing. Therefore, they are not moral agents. We call those moral patients. Okay? So what we call the moral community, which is an abstract concept, is made up of agents, moral agents, and moral patients, also called the marginal cases. It's just another expression we use, the marginal cases. So again, the moral community is an abstract concept. It's like saying the scientific community, or the community of people who believe in extraterrestrials. We are not talking about a special community somewhere on your way to San Diego or something like that, but it's an abstract concept. We put together people from all different parts of the world who share a certain characteristic. So that's a moral community. Now, we know animals could not be members of the moral community as moral agents. That's an absolute impossibility. Animals cannot start moral action. Maybe from the perspective of some Eastern religions, there is some question as to whether animals can accumulate good karma through doing good moral actions. But in the West, the consensus is animals do not have a moral conscience. They cannot initiate moral action. They cannot tell right from wrong. Okay? Therefore, the only possibility would be to include more animals in the moral community as moral patients. So this is the question. Okay? Could animals be considered moral patients? Now, do not fall in the easy trap of saying that, sure, animals are moral patients because they're not moral agents, therefore they're moral patients. No. If animals were to be considered, if animals were considered moral patients right now, then we wouldn't be discussing this topic today because the problem would be solved. If you're a moral patient, we can't kill you, we can't eat you, we can't do any of those horrible things to you. So right now the consensus in society is that animals do not have any moral rights or legal rights, that goes without saying, and therefore animals fall completely outside the moral community. That's the general consensus in our society. Animals are neither moral agents nor moral patients. Our task here is to determine whether that is the morally correct position. But if it is not, if we were to determine that animals do have moral rights, they would have moral rights only as moral patients, never as moral agents. They could not act like we do, like adult humans, okay? Now, in the Western tradition, the position has traditionally been that animals do not have moral rights. And we have plenty of philosophers who have argued this position, who have argued in support of this position. We're going to review some of those philosophers, and then we are going to go to the ones that feel that animals do have moral rights. So let me start first with what we call the indirect duty view of animal rights. The indirect duty, meaning we only have an indirect obligation, an indirect duty to animals, not a direct duty. I have a direct duty to you as human beings, but to animals, according to these philosophers and according to this position, I only have an indirect duty. What does that mean? Well, what it means is that I have a duty to the owner of an animal or to the owner of an object, for that matter, but not to the object or to the animal itself, okay? So that when it comes to an object, I cannot damage someone's car, not because the car itself has any rights, but because the car belongs to someone else. So by damaging that car, I am actually violating someone else's rights. By the same token, the indirect duty view of animal rights states that if I hurt an animal, the problem is that I may be violating someone's property or someone's sensitivity. So you may actually be sued and go to court and go even to prison if you mistreat an animal in our society today, but not because the animal has any rights, but because what you did may have been displeasing to other people who saw it, to our sensitivity, or even if you didn't see it, you may think it's displeasing. We agree that it's a really nasty and cruel thing to mistreat a cat or a dog. So if we know that our neighbors are torturing their little cats or dogs at home, we may even report that to the police. But it's not because the cats or the dogs have any rights. The underlying philosophical position that supports those laws is that by doing that, by mistreating those animals, those people are violating our rights as humans. So again, nothing to do with the animals themselves. That is the indirect duty view of animal rights. Now, I'd like to start with Descartes, René Descartes, as the first philosopher and the classic supporter of this indirect duty view of animal rights. The followers of Descartes, a 17th century French philosopher, actually 16th, 17th century French philosopher, are called Cartesians. And the reason is that Descartes is a compound name made of Descartes, de meaning of,